Welcome. Imagine sitting down with a truly captivating story, one that peels back the layers on a hidden history and maybe leaves you with a fresh perspective. That's what we're hoping to explore today.
It's quite something to delve into. We've got some fascinating insights here, painting a picture of India, before and during British colonial rule.
Exactly. We'll be drawing from historical observations, some economic analysis too, just to try and unpack this huge transformation, understand the key shifts that happened.
And it was a huge transformation. I mean, when you look at the starting point, around 1700, India held something like, 27% of the world's economy?
27%. That's more than all of Europe combined at the time. It's staggering.
It really is. And then you fast forward to 1947, independence, and that share has just plummeted, less than 3%.
And leaving its people impoverished. So the big question is, what drove that dramatic shift?
Well, it wasn't just a gradual decline. The analysis suggests that pre-colonial India wasn't just, sitting there. It was a manufacturing powerhouse.
Right. An industrial hub, even. I saw one description calling it more advanced than any nation in Europe or Asia back then.
Yeah, and textiles are the prime example. Everyone knew about Indian textiles.
Globally renowned.
Totally. By the mid-18th century, India controlled about a quarter of the world's textile trade. Think about that. 25%.
Where are the main centers for this?
You had places like coastal Andhra, famous for block printing, and then Gujarat, Bengal. They were producing really high-end woven stuff.
And this wasn't just isolated craftspeople, right? It supported bigger networks.
Oh, absolutely. This robust industry fueled international distribution networks. It benefited loads of other Indian artisans, merchants. It was a whole ecosystem, really dynamic.
Okay, so textiles were huge. What else? Shipbuilding comes up too.
Yes, another major industry. Lots of ports involved: Dhaka, Masilepatnam, Surat, you name it.
And the ships themselves. I heard something interesting about Bengali ships in the early 17th century.
Ah, yeah. Around 5,000 merchant ships, apparently. But the striking thing was their durability.
More durable than English ships.
Significantly so, it seems. Lifespan over 20 years compared to maybe 12 for English ones. That suggests, pretty advanced shipbuilding skills.
That gives you a real edge in trade, doesn't it? Longer lasting assets.
Definitely. Lower overheads, more reliable long-distance voyages. It all adds up.
And it wasn't just textiles and ships, there was also steel.
Right, the famous Wootz steel, or Damascus steel, as it became known in the West.
And that goes way back, doesn't it? Exported from the 6th century CE.
Prized for swords, obviously, but also just as a status symbol. High-quality, innovative metalworking.
So putting it all together, dominant manufacturing, world-leading textiles, strong shipbuilding, advanced steel.
Exactly. It paints a picture of pre-colonial India as a major exporter of high-value quality goods, a real economic force.
Which makes the subsequent changes under British rule even more stark. So how did that transformation begin? What was the British approach?
Well, the core objective, according to the analysis, was pretty clear. Subordinate the Indian nation to Britain's own interests.
And the first step seemed to be targeting those very industries we just talked about, dismantling them.
Yes. Take textiles again. They established a legal monopoly. Suddenly, the British East India Company became the only legal buyer in many areas.
And they cut off export markets too.
They did. Disrupted all the established trade routes. And because they were the only dyers, they could dictate prices.
Driving them down, I assume.
Dramatically. And here's the kicker. They often paid for these textiles using tax revenues they had already collected from India.
Wow. So extracting taxes and then using that money to buy goods at artificially low prices.
Precisely. It created this cycle of extraction. Stagnation set in, prices collapsed, and the skilled weavers were hit incredibly hard.
And it wasn't just market manipulation, was it? British manufacturers back home were getting involved.
Oh, they were lobbying hard. They wanted Indian competition eliminated.
And the measures got pretty extreme.
Extremely. We're talking about reports of company soldiers literally smashing looms, even horrific accounts of breaking weavers' thumbs to stop them working.
That's brutal. Beyond physical intimidation, what else? Tariffs.
Massive tariffs. An 80% tariff slapped on Indian textiles imported into the UK. 80%.
Making them completely uncompetitive.
Completely unviable. And other export markets were restricted too. It wasn't subtle. It was designed to kill the industry.
And this pattern, this dismantling, wasn't just for textiles.
No, it was applied across the board. Pretty much any manufacturing sector that could compete was restricted or undermined.
So the goal was to shift India's role entirely.
Exactly. From a manufacturer of finished goods to basically a supplier of raw materials, cotton, metal ore, whatever Britain needed.
Which Britain would then process and sell back to India?
Yep. So back to finished goods, often at inflated prices. It's a classic colonial economic model.
And the impact on employment must have been devastating.
Huge. By 1947, apparently only 0.7% of the Indian population was employed in manufacturing. Think about that contrast with the pre-colonial era.
0.7%. So what happened to all those displaced artisans, the weavers, the shipbuilders?
They were largely forced back onto the land, pushed into agriculture.
Which sounds like it would create its own set of problems. Can the land just absorb millions of extra people?
Well, no, it couldn't. It led to falling rural wages, increased pressure on land resources, and made the population far more vulnerable.
Vulnerable especially to things like bad harvests or droughts.
Exactly. It contributed to the conditions that led to catastrophic famines later on. It's all interconnected.
And on top of people being forced into agriculture, the British imposed incredibly high taxes on farmers, didn't they?
Oh, extraordinarily high. Often 50 to 80% of the gross income. And crucially collected before the harvest.
Before they've even sold the crop, how is that sustainable?
It wasn't. Even British officials at the time acknowledged these rates were the highest in the world. Way higher, like 3 times higher than under previous Indian rulers like the Mughals.
What happened if people couldn't pay these crushing taxes?
The consequences were severe. Reports mentioned people fleeing, maybe 2/3 of the population in some directly ruled areas just left.
Fled their homes because of taxes.
Yes, and those who stayed and defaulted, they faced confinement, even torture, and their land was confiscated.
Creating landless peasants.
Precisely. For the first time in Indian history, you see this large class of landless peasants emerging, a huge social shift driven by tax policy.
So, by the late 19th century, where did India stand in relation to Britain?
It had become Britain's single biggest source of revenue, and its largest purchaser of exports.
Funding the British Empire, essentially.
In large part, yes. Funding British civil servants, soldiers, British officials themselves were quite open about it. The Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, talked about India being bled.
Bled. That's a stark word. How did this differ from, say, previous rulers or invaders? The Mughals, for example.
That's a key distinction raised in the analysis. While previous rulers, like the Mughals, had their own issues and extracted wealth, they largely reinvested it within India. They made India their home.
Whereas the
British ruled as a disconnected colonial power. The primary goal was enriching Britain. So the vast bulk of the revenue extracted from India was sent back to Britain, not reinvested locally.
And the estimated scale of that extraction is enormous.
Modern estimates put the total drain, in today's money, at something like $43 trillion.
43 trillion. It's almost impossible to comprehend that figure.
It really is. It gives you a sense of the sheer scale of wealth transfer that occurred over 2 centuries.
Now, one thing often brought up as a positive contribution of British rule is the railway network.
Ah, yes, the railways. That's always mentioned. But we need to look at why they were built and how.
The analysis suggests they weren't primarily for India's benefit.
The main driver was British economic interest, getting raw materials like cotton and grain out of the interior to the ports efficiently.
For export.
Yes. And distributing imported British manufactured goods back into India. That was the primary function.
And the financing, wasn't that also skewed?
Heavily. British shareholders were guaranteed high rates of return, around 5%, on their investment. Any losses, covered by Indian taxpayers.
Guaranteed returns paid for by India, regardless of profitability.
Exactly. And the construction itself was incredibly expensive, far more than building railways in, say, America at the time. Plus, almost all the equipment, the rails, the locomotives, everything was imported from Britain.
So no stimulus for Indian industry there either.
Very little. The benefits for India were secondary, at best, to serving British commercial and strategic interests.
And tragically, these railways meant for transport actually played a role in worsening famines.
They did, because they made it easier to transport grain out of regions, even when those regions were suffering shortages.
Exporting food during a famine.
It happened. Grain was exported for profit while people starved. The railways facilitated this mass export, which undeniably exacerbated famines.
And the scale of these famines under British rule, it's horrific.
The estimates are around 35 million preventable deaths from famine during that period.
35 million, that number. It's more than deaths under Stalin, Mao, or even in the Holocaust, according to some comparisons.
It's a staggering figure. And it wasn't always just about a total lack of food in the country.
What do you mean?
Often food was available somewhere, but people in the famine-stricken areas were too poor to buy it. Poverty induced by the very economic policies we've been discussing. High taxes, destroyed livelihoods.
And the official British policy towards famine relief.
Was largely one of non-intervention, laissez-faire ideology, sometimes taken to cruel extremes. There are accounts of officials actively blocking private relief efforts.
Blocking aid during a famine.
It's documented. It was a catastrophic failure of governance, rooted in economic policy and ideology.
And the contrast with post-independence India is striking, isn't it?
Extremely. In over 70 years since independence, despite many challenges, India hasn't experienced a famine on anything like that scale.
Which really highlights the difference that policy and priorities make. Governance matters.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It points to the devastating consequences when a population's well-being is secondary to resource extraction and colonial interests.
So wrapping this up, we've journeyed through this period of really profound change, seeing a global economic leader transformed under colonial rule.
Yeah, it forces you to think about the long-term impacts, doesn't it? About economic policies, who benefits, who pays the price when resources are extracted.
That shift from 27% of the world economy to less than 3% with mass poverty, it happened relatively quickly in historical terms.
It did, and it makes you wonder what echoes of this history, this kind of economic relationship, might still linger in global structures today.
Something to reflect on. Hopefully this exploration has sparked some curiosity for you, the listener, maybe encouraged you to look deeper into these complex histories of economic power, political influence, and how they shape